Never before has it been this easy to fall through the cracks in Pennsylvania, a state once known for its industrial power and proud working-class spirit, now faces a crisis it can no longer hide. From the historic streets of Philadelphia to the quieter corners of Allentown and Harrisburg, a silent emergency is unfolding. If you step off the main road, away from the universities, sports stadiums, and polished city halls, you'll begin to see another side of Pennsylvania. A side where tents line the sidewalks, where families huddle under bridges once built to connect cities, where even law enforcement quietly acknowledges that some areas are no longer safe to patrol at night. This is not the Pennsylvania tourists see. This is a growing shadow in the middle of a modern state, where homelessness has turned from a problem into a quiet breakdown of the system itself. In today's video, we go beyond the landmarks and postcards. We'll explore the places where the spotlight doesn't reach, the people whose stories never make headlines, and the questions most of us are too afraid to ask. Because the American dream isn't just fading here. For many, it's collapsing in real time. As always, this is not a pessimistic warning, but a perspective built on real data, local voices, and what's actually happening on the ground. Are you ready to take a closer look at what Pennsylvania doesn't put on the map? Let's begin. Pennsylvania, a state once defined by its iron backbone and working-class legacy, is now quietly facing one of the most pressing human challenges of our time. The signs may not be obvious from the main roads or state buildings, but take a few steps off the usual path and you'll begin to notice what's been growing in the shadows. In 2025, over 15,000 people across the state are living without stable housing. In Philadelphia alone, more than 4,800 individuals seek shelter each night, and yet some are turned away due to limited space. Others never make it to a shelter at all, spending the night in subway stations, on park benches, or tucked beneath overpasses. But this isn't just about numbers. It's about who is affected and how. One detail stands out. A growing share of those living without homes are older adults. Many once held full-time jobs in factories or service industries. They paid into the system, raised families, and built neighborhoods. Some even served their country. Now they quietly gather near libraries, transit stops, or city hall buildings, not for civic duties, but for warmth and rest. From Pittsburgh to Scranton, you can find makeshift shelters made of tarps, blankets, and cardboard. These are not isolated incidents. They've become part of the landscape in a way that many communities never imagined. And it's not just the visuals that tell the story, it's the pace of change. Recent local reports show that homelessness among older residents in Pennsylvania has increased by more than 20% over the past 2 years. The causes aren't always dramatic. A rent hike, a medical expense, a job loss during a downturn. But the outcome is life-altering. 1 month of instability, one misstep. And for many, there's no quick path back. Public spaces that once symbolized community are now silent reminders of unmet needs. Some residents pass these areas daily, unsure what to feel. Pity, discomfort, guilt, or maybe just this question. If the people who helped build this state are now the ones sleeping outside, what kind of support system are we really offering? If there is a place often described as the historic heartbeat of Pennsylvania, it is Philadelphia, the birthplace of American democracy, the city of the Liberty Bell, Independence Hall, and world-renowned universities. But just blocks away from those proud landmarks, a different version of the city unfolds. Walk a few streets from City Hall or the bustling Reading Terminal Market, and the scenery begins to shift. Sidewalks, once lined with vendors and students, are now shared with tents, folded blankets, and individuals quietly resting against stone walls. At first, it's subtle. Then, it's impossible to ignore. According to local outreach groups, Philadelphia currently has the highest concentration of unsheltered individuals in Pennsylvania. Some reports even estimate that in certain central zones, you're more likely to see someone without shelter than a parked car. One area that draws special attention is Kensington Avenue, a corridor now widely known among residents as a place where hope feels distant and where even daily safety becomes uncertain. Old train platforms have turned into shelter zones. Side alleys near public libraries now hold makeshift communities. In the evenings, the warm lights from restaurants and theatres fade just a few blocks in, where doorways become places to sleep and bus stops double as resting points. One volunteer shared, "There are blocks we don't go to after sundown, not because we don't care, but because the system isn't there to protect anyone anymore." And that may be the hardest part. Not the visible need, but the quiet withdrawal of support. In places once known for their strength, their institutions, and their sense of order. How can it be that in the center of one of Pennsylvania's most historic cities, there are now stretches that even outreach teams hesitate to enter? Where are the services? The safeguards? Some nonprofits are trying, step by step, van by van, one caseworker at a time, to offer food, counseling, and safe shelter options. But the needs have outpaced the resources, and the pace of change shows no sign of slowing. If you lived in Pennsylvania just a few years ago, today's costs might feel almost unrecognizable. A gallon of milk, nearly $6. A basic breakfast sandwich at a local diner, $12 or more. A dozen eggs that once cost $1.99 now approach $5 or $6, depending on the city. According to 2025 data compiled by the Bureau of Labor Statistics and state-level reports, the cost of everyday essentials in Pennsylvania, from groceries to basic hygiene products, has increased by an average of 60% since 2020. In some urban areas like Philadelphia and Allentown, it's even higher. Here's something worth pausing on. Income levels for many working-class families and older adults have barely moved in the same time frame, increasing by less than 20%. This imbalance doesn't just stretch a budget, it breaks it. For older adults living on fixed incomes, monthly costs for food, transportation, and medication now exceed $1,200 to $1,500. And that's before considering rent or housing. It's no longer a matter of saving more. It's a question of what to give up, groceries or a medical appointment. But what truly pushes people off the edge is this: housing. In 2025, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Philadelphia now hovers around $1,950 per month. In cities like Pittsburgh and Harrisburg, it's not far behind, with many older buildings being converted into luxury units priced far beyond what most residents can afford. Yet, here's the alarming truth. According to the Pennsylvania Housing Alliance, over 45% of renters in the state now spend more than half of their income on housing alone, far beyond the federal government's 30% affordability guideline. Let that sink in. Nearly half of renters are already beyond the breaking point, living paycheck to paycheck, one emergency away from losing their homes. There are simply not enough affordable units available. For every 100 low-income households, there are only 39 affordable rental homes statewide, leaving more than half without realistic housing options. People turn to shelters that are already full. Some live in cars. Others rely on friends for a while. And many, eventually, end up with nowhere else to go. This isn't about overspending. This is about being priced out of stability, slowly, quietly, and without warning. What's even more difficult to accept is this. Pennsylvania isn't only home to older residents facing housing insecurity. It's also where hundreds of children are growing up without a place to truly call home. In cities like Philadelphia, Allentown, and Erie, shelters report that entire families are arriving at their doors, not just individuals. Some children are born into this instability, never knowing what it feels like to come home to the same bed twice. Picture this: a child trying to finish homework on the floor of a borrowed motel room. A teenager quietly lining up at a community pantry after school. A toddler learning to fall asleep to the sound of buses, not bedtime stories. According to 2025 data from Pennsylvania's Department of Education, over 40,000 students across the state are currently classified as homeless or housing insecure, many living in temporary shelters, doubled up with other families, or in vehicles. And here's the part that's even harder to absorb. Some of these children never make it to school at all. For families constantly moving, education becomes one more thing to juggle, not a guarantee. When you're unsure where you'll sleep tonight, catching the morning bus isn't always possible. Before they can learn how to spell, they've already learned how to keep warm on a cold bench. Before they can memorize multiplication tables, they've had to figure out which churches offer dinner on Tuesdays. And this isn't just a story about poverty. More and more, it's affecting working families, people with jobs, with routines, with dreams. As rent prices rise and wages stay the same, a single unexpected bill, a car repair, a medical need, can send a household into uncertainty. That's the quiet shift happening now. Homelessness is no longer only a crisis of the very poor. It's a growing risk for the middle, for the people we used to think were secure. Pennsylvania has long been seen as a place of balance, not as overwhelming as coastal metropolises, not as isolated as rural outposts, a place where people came for steady work, family life, and community. But today, that sense of balance is under pressure. Quietly, steadily, and for many, unexpectedly. As the national housing crisis expands, Pennsylvania has also become a destination for those seeking refuge and a fresh start. People are arriving not only from nearby states like Ohio or New Jersey, but also from across the country, some from as far as Texas and California, driven by rising rents, economic uncertainty, or natural disasters. Cities like Philadelphia, Erie, and Harrisburg are feeling the shift. More people, more demand, and a support system that wasn't built for this volume. Here's something that deserves special attention. Even though shelters are operating at full capacity, the need keeps growing, faster than cities can respond. According to city officials, certain counties have seen a 30% increase in requests for emergency housing within just 1 year. Local non-profits report growing waitlists for shelter beds, food assistance, and basic hygiene supplies. Meanwhile, many organizations rely on seasonal funding, which means when winter hits, the strain becomes even more intense. And in that strain, difficult choices begin to emerge. Some programs must prioritize families with young children. Others can't offer services to people without state-issued ID. And many simply run out of resources before the end of the month. The reality is this: when more people seek safety than the system can serve, someone always gets pushed further back in the line. And here's where the divide begins. Long-time residents see rising rents and wonder if new arrivals are driving up the demand. Newcomers feel unwelcome, confused by systems they can't access. Both groups feel abandoned by institutions that were supposed to help. But this isn't just about policy. It's about people, and whether the places we call home are prepared to protect the most vulnerable, no matter where they're from. Because if Pennsylvania, a place once known for its fairness and grit, is starting to struggle with the basic promise of stability, then what happens next? There was a time when Pennsylvania's middle class was the quiet engine of the state. People who worked 2 jobs, paid their taxes, owned a modest home in a quiet neighborhood. They took pride in raising their children with values, responsibility, resilience, and hope. But today, in cities like Pittsburgh, Harrisburg, and even in smaller towns, that image is quietly fading. Now, even working full-time, having a degree, and staying out of debt doesn't always guarantee security. In fact, many middle-income households are finding themselves one small emergency away from crisis. According to recent data from the Pennsylvania Economy League, more than 38% of working households in the state now spend over half of their income just on housing. Let that number settle in. Even families doing everything right are being squeezed by costs they can't control and can no longer keep up with. In Philadelphia, the average cost of a 2-bedroom apartment now sits at nearly $2,300 per month. For a family with 2 kids, monthly expenses, including food, transportation, utilities, and childcare, often exceed $6,500. And that's before anything unexpected happens. What happens when a parent loses hours at work? When a medical bill appears without warning? When the car breaks down and there's no savings left? For many, the result isn't just a tighter budget. It's suddenly having to choose between rent and groceries, between medicine and keeping the lights on. Some now sleep in their cars while continuing to work full shifts at local hospitals or public offices. Others move in with extended family, 5, 6, sometimes 8 people sharing a space meant for 2. And as the middle shrinks, the safety net thins. The buffer that once existed between wealth and poverty, the one that held society together, is now wearing down. When those who are trying the hardest are also the ones falling fastest, what does that say about where we're headed? In Pennsylvania, you might pass by them every day without ever learning their stories. Not because they're invisible, but because somewhere along the way, the world stopped looking. One of them is a 75-year-old woman who spent decades working quietly in a school cafeteria just outside Harrisburg. She never missed a shift. But when her apartment complex changed hands, her rent jumped by more than 60%. She cut back on groceries. She walked instead of taking the bus. Still, she couldn't keep up. Now she sleeps on a bench near a library. She qualifies for assistance, but after months of waiting, her paperwork vanished in a bureaucratic shuffle. When asked what she misses most, she said softly, "A door I can lock at night." She still carries her old work ID in her coat pocket, a small reminder that she once belonged somewhere. Another is a teenager in Western Philadelphia, just 16. He should be thinking about homework, about friendships, about tomorrow. But instead, he hides behind a gas station at night, hoping no one will see him. After years in the foster system and 6 different placements, he chose the street over more upheaval. He curls up beside a chain-link fence with a backpack for a pillow. He dreams of finishing school, maybe opening a small barbershop one day. But lately, even dreaming feels like a luxury. Then there's a former hardware store manager in central Pennsylvania. A man who once owned a house, coached Little League, handed out gloves in winter. But after losing his spouse unexpectedly, he fell behind on mortgage payments. The house was foreclosed. Within a year, the man who once gave help now needs it. He tried to get into a shelter, but it was full. He lives in his car now, parked on a quiet side street. Each morning, he shaves in a gas station bathroom and puts on a clean shirt. He still goes to job interviews, still tries. "I'm not lazy," he says. "I'm just stuck." And getting unstuck, that takes more help than people realize. It's not always hunger or cold that cuts deepest. Sometimes, it's the way people begin to look through you, like you're not there. The cafeteria worker, the teenager, the man who used to own a home. These aren't isolated stories. They're not rare exceptions. In today's Pennsylvania, Homelessness no longer happens only to someone else. It happens after one illness, one job loss, one unexpected turn. It happens to veterans, to parents, to students, to people who once stood in line with us at the grocery store and now sleep behind it. When the heart of Pennsylvania slows, can the body of America keep walking? Pennsylvania has long stood as a cornerstone of the American spirit, the birthplace of independence, the silent backbone of working-class grit. But when even that foundation begins to shake, the questions grow louder. Walk through the streets of downtown Philadelphia, just a few steps from historic landmarks, and you might see someone curled up beside a heating grate, not because they want to be there, but because there is nowhere else. That's no longer a statistic. That's a human reality, right outside the lens of comfort. What happens to a society when children grow up not knowing what it means to feel safe at home? When older adults, those who once built our roads, taught our children, ran our trains, are now forced to carry every possession in a shopping cart. In Pittsburgh, you'll find families sheltering in their cars parked outside fast food chains. In Allentown, you'll see people lining up quietly outside food pantries before sunrise. And in counties once known for calm and suburban peace, the silence now feels heavier because it hides too many stories left unheard. This is no longer just about housing. It's about whether dignity still has a place in the places we live. It's about whether a person's worth is measured by their need or by their humanity. Policymakers will continue to debate budgets, zoning, and social programs. Reports will be published. Plans will be drafted. But on any given night, over 15,000 people in Pennsylvania will sleep without a roof. So what are we really measuring? Progress or patience? Because a city cannot call itself strong if its people are left behind, and a nation cannot move forward if its most vulnerable are standing still. The lights still shine across Pennsylvania's skyline, but beneath those lights are shadows we cannot keep ignoring. What are your thoughts on the growing homelessness crisis in Pennsylvania? Do you think change is still possible? And what role should we each play? Let us know in the comments below. And if this video made you think differently, please like, share, and subscribe to support more content that explores the stories behind the headlines. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Note: the information in this video is compiled from publicly available and reliable sources. It is intended for educational and analytical purposes only, and not for financial, medical, or legal guidance. Viewers are encouraged to consider additional context when forming conclusions.